And to kick it off, we have Christina Tierman. Christina has a master's degree, and that is from UC Santa Barbara. Christina worked for the Alaska AmeriCorps and is an alum. And Christina also was at the Science Center here for 7 years before starting her current position. And she has created some curriculum for K through 12 students. And that's led to a bunch of marine debris removal cleanup efforts, which is amazing to see. And then Christina also likes to volunteer with the local animal shelter here in Sitka. So everyone give a warm welcome to Christina. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you, Wyatt, for giving me a master's degree, because I do not have one, but maybe now I do. But yes, it is so good to be here today for the third day of WhaleFest. I feel honored and terrified, but mostly honored to get to speak with you all and share my story about marine debris cleanup as a messy way to make meaningful connections. So like Wyatt said, my name is Christina Tierman, and I work as the Arctic Marine Debris Manager with Ocean Conservancy, where I get to work with individuals, organizations, tribes, and communities around Alaska on the Arctic region on marine debris. So I get to plan cleanups, I get to support cleanups, I get to coordinate outreach events, and I get to meet wonderful people like all of you who are also interested in and passionate about this topic. And if I had to choose 2 words to describe my job, I would choose connect and collect, hence the sash, because I get to go out and physically collect debris. But a big part of my job is also connecting people who are working in this field with one another. And working in this field is pretty interesting. And because of that, I do get asked a lot of interesting questions. And over the years, I have compiled these questions into a list of Marine Debris Manager FAQs, and I figured that many of you might have the same or similar questions, and rather than making you wait until the very end of today's talk to get those answers, we are going to kick things off with the answers. So, FAQ number 1, what is the most unusual thing that you have found? And keep in mind, I have picked up thousands of pieces of trash on beaches near and far, so I have definitely come across some pretty strange things, but the most unusual thing that I found was found not far from here. Some of you may have been on this cleanup when we came across an unmarked bucket full of an unmarked bag containing an unidentifiable white powder. And you are going to be disappointed to know that we never actually figured out what that white powder was. But our group came to the conclusion that it was either from a drug bust, which is probably what you all were thinking, or it was a bucket full of salt. So those are your 2 options, unless you have others for us to choose from. So the next question I get asked all the time is, what is the coolest thing you've ever found? And I always feel a lot of pressure when I get asked this question to say something that's like really gonna wow people. And the reality is we usually find just kind of a lot of normal everyday stuff. But sometimes you do find some valuable things in the ocean, and sometimes there are, some cool things. But what I have found that I wanna share with you is not something that's particularly valuable, but it is quite popular. And I'll give you a hint. It is a weird looking rubber shoe that people either love or hate. You're probably thinking it, the Croc. But this was not just any Croc, and this was not just one Croc. We have found dozens and dozens of brand new Crocs on beaches. And while I proudly fall into the anti-Croc group, I have to admit that there is something kind of cool about finding brand new shoes on the beach. And it turns out that this was not just some weird coincidence where people were losing their brand new shoes. There was a container spill that happened in 2020. A cargo ship lost over 1,800 shipping containers that went plummeting into the ocean. And some of those containers contained Crocs. And speaking of container spills, I also get asked this question all the time. There was a container spill that happened near the port of Vancouver in 2021. And it had Yeti coolers in it, something that is a little bit valuable. They got caught up in the currents and made their way up here to Alaska, where many boaters and beachgoers we're finding them on beaches. So I often get asked if I have found one, and sadly the answer is no. But when I do, that will definitely beat out Crocs as the new coolest find. I also get asked if I've ever found a glass ball. This is hands down the most sought after beach treasure of all. And despite all the time and all the effort and the countless hours and miles I have walked on beaches, I have yet to find one. I also get asked, what is the most littered beach that I have been to? And you have to remember that it is part of my job to go to beaches with trash on them. So I do see a lot of littered beaches. But every once in a while, there are beaches that I go to that will stop me in my tracks and my stomach drops because there is just so much garbage on those beaches and you just don't even know where to start. And you'll clean for hours and it looks like you haven't even made a dent. And there's a beach actually on the backside of Bjork Island that is like this for me. We go to it and there's these nets and line just all tangled up in the driftwood logs for the whole length of the beach. And then even going up until the high tide zone in the tree line, these are all microplastics going like a foot down into the soil. And when I show photos and videos like this, and I talk about my work, I often get asked this question: how do you stay hopeful? And this question isn't quite as easy to understand. There's not one word or photo that I could put up here that would tell you how it is that I stay hopeful, but I do. And so to share that with you, I am going to take you on a journey with me. So we are going to go to 3 communities around Alaska where groups are doing cleanup work in our state. And I am going to share the stories and the faces behind this work. And I'm hoping that by the end of today's talk, you will not only understand how it is that I stay hopeful, but you yourselves might also feel a little bit of hope. But first, who am I? And why am I here telling you this story? So I grew up in Northern California in a small mountain town called Truckee. I think we have a group from Truckee here, which is just totally random, but awesome. And it was such a wonderful place to grow up. And it instilled in me a love of the outdoors and an appreciation for being in nature. And I followed my older sister to school at UC Santa Barbara. I entered as a math major and I quickly realized that liking math and majoring in math are 2 very different things. So I switched around a few times until I landed on general biology, thinking that I wanted to pursue a career in veterinary medicine. But I decided before committing to vet school, I would take a year off to see what else was out there. And during that year, I found my way to Sitka, to the Sitka AmeriCorps program, where I was lucky enough to get to spend my year of service at the Sitka Sound Science Center. And my very first week of service was Sitka WhaleFest 2015, 10 years ago this weekend. And I remember being in absolute awe of the whole event and the organization and the community of Sitka. Here I was in this brand new job, brand new colleagues, brand new community, and I instantly felt a sense of connection with my new colleagues, with all the people attending WhaleFest, and with the community. And that first week of my AmeriCorps service during Sitka WhaleFest 2015 was the start to an amazing year full of new opportunities and new connections. And like many people who come to Sitka for just 1 year, I quickly knew that that would not be enough time. So I was fortunate enough to get hired on at the Sitka Sound Science Center as the education coordinator, where I spent the next 6 years in the most fun job that I've ever had, working with and learning from master educators like Janet Clark and science communicators like Lisa Bush. And it was just such a fun and challenging and unique job. I got to teach about the salmon life cycle to first graders. I got to pretend like I knew what I was doing when I dissected a pig's heart. I got to make costumes and dress up and walk in parades. I learned how to scuba dive and would dive on our saltwater intake. I got to bartend at events, which was super fun. And I got to participate in and eventually lead marine debris cleanups. And it was through being able to do marine debris cleanups with former research director Tori O'Connell that I discovered my passion for marine debris. And that led me to my current job, with Ocean Conservancy as the Arctic Marine Debris Manager, which I have been in for 3 years now. And if you think back to when I said I was just going to take a year off to explore other areas of interest, that obviously turned into more than a year. It turned into 10. And while at this point it is probably not in the cards for me to go to vet school, I have still managed to find a way to fulfill my passion for working with animals. You knew that there was no way I wouldn't have kittens in this PowerPoint. So I volunteer regularly at the Sitka Animal Shelter, and I co-founded the nonprofit Friends of Sitka Animal Shelter. And that is how I spend the majority of my free time. And I could probably also spend the majority of your time here telling you all about it. But instead, if you want to know more, or if you want to donate, you can go to that QR code. But first, donate to the Science Center. That is a priority. And then if you want to donate more, check us out. And those are 2 cats available for adoption. But that's not what you're here for. You're here for marine debris. So, like I said, I work for Ocean Conservancy. We are a nonprofit organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have a strong presence here in Alaska. We're an ocean advocacy and policy organization, and we work with communities around the world on different ocean-related issues, one of those issues being marine debris. And Ocean Conservancy has been involved in marine debris for 40 years through the International Coastal Cleanup, which is the largest volunteer effort for ocean health in the world, and each year mobilizes hundreds of thousands of people to get out and clean beaches and waterways in their community, all while collecting data and submitting that data to a global database that we manage on our website. And so to date, over 19 million people across 155 countries have participated and have together removed over 440 million pounds of trash, which is awesome. And it is really great to be part of an organization that works globally. We get to learn from different communities and share strategies and information with each other. And while it would be really nice if I also got to travel to some of those communities, like in Hawaii or Belize or some of the warmer places that we work, I chose to live and work in Alaska. So my focus is the Arctic and subarctic region, which I wouldn't trade. And these are a handful of the communities that we partner with throughout the Arctic and subarctic region. So we have a lot of groups that we work with in Alaska, some in Greenland, Iceland, and Norway. But we don't have time to go to all these places today. So like I promised you, I am going to answer that question, how do I stay hopeful? And we are going to do that by going to 3 communities here in Alaska. So we are going to go to Sitka, which we're already here, but we'll also get to go to Yakutat and St. Paul Island. And I have had the great pleasure of visiting and working closely with all of these communities over the years. And so I feel very honored and excited to get to share their stories with you today. And while each of these communities are hundreds of miles apart and they're different in many ways, they are all connected by ocean currents. Because of their exposed locations, ocean currents carry large quantities of marine debris to their shorelines. So just like that marine debris, and just like Crush and Squirt from Finding Nemo, we are going to hop in the currents and take a journey. And I learned last night that the current that they hop in is the East Australian current, which I got wrong on trivia. But we're not going to be in that current today. We are going to start in the North Pacific Current, and we are going to make our way up to the Alaska Coastal Current here to Sitka. And we are going to work with the Sitka Sound Science Center. The Sitka Sound Science Center has been involved in marine debris research, removal, and education since 2008. And over the years, they have partnered with commercial fishermen, with school groups, with policymakers, scientists, community members, and other communities around Alaska to remove marine debris, to educate the public, and to collect data on the types of debris that are found. And in Sitka, we don't get a lot of debris here on beaches that are accessible by the road system, which means we have to use boats like the Esther GC taxi, which that is actually it, to access the beaches that need cleaning. And many of the beaches that are heavily impacted are the ones that are the south facing. And that's where the currents and the prevailing winds carry a lot of the garbage to. They're also the most exposed, which makes sense, but they're also the hardest to get to, which makes our job challenging sometimes. One of the places that we go to do cleanups often that gets a lot of debris is Cruise Off Island. So for anyone not from here, that is the island just across the way with Mount Edgecombe, the volcano on it. And so that is where I am going. Well, Davey Lubin, our captain, is going to be taking us today. So we've made the 12-mile journey over to Cruise Off, and we've taken our dinghy up above the high tide line, tied it off so it doesn't float away, and we are on the hunt for garbage. And we're traversing over these piles of driftwood logs and slippery volcanic rock, trying not to slip and fall or roll an ankle. And the beach looks pretty clean from a distance, but the closer we look, the more we see, especially buried under all these logs and up in the high tide line, up in the grasses. We find all sorts of things like random plastic fragments, plastic water bottles, microplastic, so anything less than 5 millimeters in size, nets and rope, buoys, and of course, styrofoam, which is the most annoying piece of debris to pick up because you pick it up and it crumbles in your hand and sheds microplastics into the environment. But we have managed to finish our cleanup without rolling our ankle on one of the logs or running into a bear. But we did swamp our boots, which happens on every cleanup. And we did accidentally deploy the bear spray, which did happen on some cleanups this summer. So if you want to hear some bear spray mishap stories, talk to the Science Center. But the cleanup was a success. And at the end of a successful cleanup day, we're left with a big pile of trash. And we, of course, cannot leave the trash there. We need to get it back to town. And it's one thing to get people to the beach to do the cleanups, but getting the people and the garbage off the shore and to the boat and back to town is the really challenging part. So if the seas are really calm and the weather is perfect and the tide is just right, the boat could pull up to shore just like this, and we could form an assembly line of people and hand the trash one person to the next and load it onto the boat. We would do it very quickly before the tide goes out or comes in. And that would be pretty easy. That would be our best, most favorable option for getting the debris off. But unfortunately, the seas are rarely calm and the weather is rarely perfect. So if that is not an option, we could also pile the debris into an inflatable raft, and then we could row or tow the debris back to our main boat. And we'd probably have to make 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or so trips, but we would make one of the young crew members be the one to row, so it wouldn't be so bad. But if neither of those are options, we could coordinate with the U.S. Coast Guard. We are so lucky to have Coast Guard Station here in Sitka to meet us out there and to sling load the debris back to town. And this is obviously super helpful and beneficial for us because it saves a lot of time and work for us to, hike this debris back to where our boat is. But we have been told by the Coast Guard it's also helpful for them because they have training requirements, and this can serve as one of the training flights. And so we are super grateful for the Coast Guard. We do this usually once per year with them, but whenever we do, it is always a huge success. And so big shout out to our Coast Guard station here in Sitka. Okay, I'm going to skip the part where we get back to town and have to unload the debris, carry it up the ramp, load it into the truck, drive it out the road, and then unload it, because that is not the fun part. And that's when the volunteers usually leave before that happens. But I do want to give a big shout out to Sophia Danielson. Sophia coordinates the marine debris program at the Science Center, and she does a fantastic job. So we are super lucky to get to work with Sophia. And she was not tangled up in the rope. She had it just kind of draped there. And while I've talked a lot about removal, the Science Center Marine Debris Program does so much more. So in addition to removal, they also conduct research, they serve as a data hub, and they run education programs. So one of their current research projects is understanding how marine debris impacts the intertidal zone, including invertebrate habitat, which is a really interesting study. And if you have questions about that, you should definitely find Zofia or Lauren and ask them more. They also serve as a statewide data hub. So since 2014, the Science Center has managed this database that is currently on their website, and it has information on cleanups from around the state from about 2006 to 2018 or so. And they are currently working on revamping this database, and I think the new version will be live very soon, which is really exciting, so be sure to check that out. And they also lead a wide array of education programs, including a Scientists in the Schools program, where Sophia and I will go into the classroom and lead marine debris education lessons and summer camps. We led a Talking Trash summer camp a few summers ago where we took students out and did a cleanup, and then they brought items back, and we worked with Pat Kehoe to build a sculpture out of the marine debris. And then just this morning, Sophia and I were leading a marine debris printmaking workshop with some of the high school students here. And these are some of the photos from that. It was super fun. And I will say this morning when it was pouring rain and windy and I knew we were going to have to go outside to sort garbage, I was like trying to think of like, how could I make an excuse for not having to go sort garbage? But we did it and it actually was really fun. And I know the students had fun too, because we were out there sorting, and at first, you know, they were kind of saying how wet they were, but then before you knew it, everyone was talking about all the cool things that they were finding in the debris pile. And it really is programs like these that the Science Center does through the research programs and the education programs that connect the science and the field work with the community, and getting kids excited about sorting trash. It is that gives me hope. Okay, we're leaving Sitka, and we are following the ACC, the Alaska Coastal Current, up the coast about 250 miles to Yakutat, where the Yakutat Tlingit tribe, their environmental department works to address environmental priorities in the community, and one of those priorities is marine debris. And I have been very fortunate to visit Yakutat 6 times over the past 3 years, and it is such a remarkable and special place. The people are so welcoming there, and the coastline is so beautiful, and it is so different from Sitka. So instead of rocky shores, they have these long stretches of sandy beach with these large river mouths separating the beaches. And then that's just, you know, looking up, you see the snow-capped mountains and glaciers. It is just such a beautiful, beautiful place. So we are going to join the Yakutat Tlingit tribe for a cleanup. And in Yakutat, rather than taking a boat, we are going to take a small plane. Well, half our group will take a small plane, and the other half is going to take an ATV on the beach. And we're going to meet at our cleanup site. Our plane has just landed on this small gravel airstrip next to the beach. We've unloaded all of our field gear for the week-long expedition. We set up our tents, and we try to ignore the fact that there's this large abandoned plane nearby, but it's pretty hard to ignore because it's like right there and it's very large. But we just are going to have to deal with it. So we set up our camp, we set up the electric fence around our makeshift kitchen area and our food storage area so that the bears don't get in. And we fire up our ATV and we're ready to hit the beach. And it's been raining quite a bit, as it does in Yakutat. So the river crossings are a bit challenging, but we make it through, and we spend the next 8 hours or so that day looking for garbage. And the first thing that we come across on the beach is just a small piece of net on the surface of the sand, and we go to pick it up, and we're met with resistance, and there's this iceberg of net below, and this happens very often. And with all 14 of us working for about 3 hours or so, we're able to dig this massive 2,000 or so pound trawl net out of the sand. To get it back to our field camp, we'll have to cut it up into chunks and load it into the back of those ATVs and then drive back across that river and get it to our camp. We also find bundles of other types of net, gill net, We find strapping bands, lots of strapping bands in these big bundles, also buried in the sand. This is a hagfish trap. If you were at Kim's presentation yesterday, you saw that sometimes these can get stuck on the noses of seals and sea lions. Lots of hard buoys, styrofoam and plastic water bottles, and more styrofoam. But we have made it through our cleanup week without getting swept away in the river and without throwing out our back, lugging that big trawl net across the sand. But our tent did flood in the storm, which did happen to quite a few of us. And we are covered head to toe in mosquito bites because there are so many mosquitoes in Yakutat. But everyone except for Relian, who was our youngest crew member, who remembered to wear his bug net the entire week. So good job, Relian. But the cleanup was a success. So we pack up our field camp and we charter a plane to get all of the super sacks full of garbage back to Yakutat, where we then spend the week at the Yakutat landfill, sorting through everything, weighing and collecting data. And over the course of the 5-week field season, which in this case was spread across 2 years, we covered over 50 miles of shoreline and removed over 21,000 pounds of garbage. About 8,500 pounds of that was net and line, which was the largest category by weight, but the largest category by item count was plastic bottles. So we collected over 5,000 plastic water bottles. And these numbers are very impressive, but what we remember most about the cleanup was the people. We got to work side by side with tribal staff, with city staff, with community volunteers, with kids, and even a few dogs. And as cheesy as it sounds, we left with new connections, new perspectives. Half the group left with glass balls, including Relian. I did not. But we all left feeling a little bit hopeful. Okay, we're hopping back in the current. This time we're going a little bit further west. We are going to head to St. Paul Island, which is in the middle of the Bering Sea. It is one of the 4 Pribilof Islands. And on St. Paul Island, the Aleut community of St. Paul Island's tribal government's Ecosystem Conservation Office has been running a marine debris removal program since 1998. And Ocean Conservancy has been partnering with the tribe since 2019 to support their cleanup programs. And I was lucky enough to get to go there this May for the first time to support a cleanup. And St. Paul Island is truly one of the most beautiful and unique places that I have ever been to. The islands there are extremely biodiverse. They're often referred to as the Galapagos of the North. They're home to the Unangan people, which means the people of the sea. And they're also home to over half the world's population of northern fur seals who go to the islands to breed and raise their pups every summer. And the cliffs and the shorelines there are covered with millions of nesting seabirds. It is a birder's paradise. And the waters surrounding the islands are just teeming with life. But because of their location in the middle of the Bering Sea and at the center of all those currents, it is also teeming with marine debris. So every 2 years, or when funding allows, the tribe will organize cleanups across these 10 beaches, which are also the fur seal rookeries. So their goal is to get the rookeries clean in preparation for the fur seals to return to shore. And there's like a 2-week window when they can do this because it's really cold there and there's snow and there's storms up until like mid-May. But then starting June 1st, the rookeries are all closed, so you can't go on the beaches. And so there's just this very short window when you can get out and do these cleanups. And the people of St. Paul Island have been doing this for many years, but what used to be going out and clearing the shores of the driftwood logs and large animal bones to welcome the fur seals to shore is now going out and clearing the beaches of plastic. So on this cleanup, we are part of a crew of about 15 to 20 people. We get to work alongside the tribal staff and community members who've been hired to spend the next 5 days cleaning these shorelines. So each morning we meet at the office, we load into our trucks and our ATVs, and we head to one of those 10 beaches. We spend the morning on a sandy beach like this, where we find all different types of net and line. This is another one of those beaches that stopped me in my tracks when I saw it, and you just don't even know where to start because there's so much garbage there. You also find, similar to in Yakutat, these big bundles of strapping bands and net and line buried in the sand. And the nice thing about doing cleanups there is that you can get the ATVs on the beach, and so you can hook up the ATVs to these items and then pull them out of the sand. And we're not able to do that here in Sitka because our beaches are so rocky and we can't get the ATVs over there, but it does make, hauling nets like this a lot easier, being able to have that type of equipment there. But we can't always use the equipment. Sometimes we have to just use our muscle, and we haul the nets and line up over the bluffs. And then there's also some rocky beaches there. And there's just as much debris on these rocky beaches, but instead of digging out of the sand, you're using this giant crowbar. You can kind of see that yellow crowbar. And one person is using that to pry the rocks up, while then another crew member is really carefully, quickly, and with a lot of trust, reaching their hand under to grab out whatever is kind of lodged there under those rocks. So we've managed to make it through the week without getting our hand crushed by a rock and without running into a large male northern fur seal that looks just like a rock on the beach. I don't know if you can spot it in this photo. But we get our nets and our line in the ATVs. We get all of the debris loaded up in the trucks and back to our storage site, and the cleanup week was a success. So in just 5 days of cleanup, we collect over 25,000 pounds of garbage. And this is the sorting process. We bring everything back, dump everything out of the super sacks or out of the ATV holders, and then sorting through everything, putting it into different super sacks, and then using a big forklift to weigh each super sack to get a weight per category. And on St. Paul Island, most of what they get is fishing gear. So about 23,000 pounds of that was net and line. And unfortunately, it is the net and line that has the largest impact on the northern fur seals. And because of this, in addition to the cleanup program, the tribe also runs an entanglement program, and I believe they're part of PEG. So they work with Kim on that. So they have a disentanglement coordinator, Chelsea, and they have a team of 3 highly skilled crew members, Aaron, Paul, and Dallas, who go out and spot the entangled seals, they catch them, and they free them. And each year they disentangle anywhere from 25 to 65 seals. And when I've talked to them, they said that they would probably disentangle more, but those are just the ones that they're seeing. And that's with the capacity that they have to do that. And this is a very difficult, dangerous, but completely necessary task. As you can see, the northern fur seals are not only important to the ecosystem on the Pribilof Islands, but they're also central to the community's culture and their way of life. And the debris that washes ashore on St. Paul Island and on many other beaches throughout Alaska, most of it did not originate in this community, yet it is the community that has taken on the responsibility to clean it up. And for many years, the tribe has worked and continues to work to make sure that the lands and the waters and the wildlife that have sustained them can remain healthy and vibrant for years to come. And while seeing numbers like this and seeing photos like I've shared can feel very overwhelming and daunting, it really is getting to work with amazing people like this disentanglement crew and Lauren and Veronica who plan the cleanups there. That is what gives us all hope. And as you can see, each of these 3 communities have very robust marine debris programs that are doing really incredible and inspiring work. And while each of them are hundreds of miles apart and they have differences in their cleanup operations, They all share similar challenges related to difficult weather and complicated logistics. But one of the biggest challenges that communities in Alaska face is, what do you do with all this garbage? So you've done a cleanup, and then you have all these super sacks full of garbage, and there's not really a good way to get it out of your community. And many of the communities here in Alaska are remote and rural, and they have limited waste management infrastructure. And their waste management infrastructure is only designed to take what is generated by the community. But we just learned that much of this marine debris is not generated by the community. It's washing up from all sorts of other places. And so these communities don't have, the landfills don't have the space to take tens of thousands of pounds of garbage from elsewhere. And these are photos from landfills and storage sites around the state. And in some cases, like on St. George Island, which is another Pribilof island, those super sacks have been sitting there for over a decade. And unfortunately, then they start to deteriorate, and that garbage can end up back into the environment. But we did send a crew out 2 years ago to repackage all those super sacks. They worked with the community members on St. George Island and St. Paul to repackage them. And then we're slowly getting the super sacks off, getting them to St. Paul where they can eventually make it out. So there is hope. In the past, disposal options have been somewhat limited in state for marine debris specifically, but we are very fortunate that there are many innovative people working around the state to research different ways to recycle marine debris. So one of those groups is Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. They're based in Kodiak. They do cleanups around the state, but they also have an innovation center in Kodiak, and they work with students from Oregon State University and Western Washington University. And their goal is to return plastics to the circular economy at their highest and best use. And so they're working to mechanically recycle marine debris right here in Alaska, which is really exciting. And then there's another group called Alaska Plastics Recovery. They're based in Anchorage, and they have a mobile recycling facility. So they can take marine debris and post-consumer recyclables, and they convert it into a lumber called grizzly wood. So it's similar to Trex. And they go around to different communities around Alaska, and their goal is to also have a mobile unit that can be put on a barge and come through Southeast Alaska. And then there's a group called Net Your Problem. They're based in Seattle, and they historically have worked with commercial fishermen around Alaska to recycle end-of-life fishing gear. And they also accept marine debris, and then they work with recyclers like Ocean Legacy Foundation, based in British Columbia, to mechanically recycle all of that. So it's great that we have these recycling options, but we still have the problem of how do we get the garbage from the community to them? Because that is where there's the complicated logistics and the high cost. And Ocean Conservancy has a grant from the EPA to work with these groups and to work with barge companies, fishermen, tour operators, and airlines around Alaska to figure out the best and most cost-effective way to get the debris from the communities to the recycling facilities for proper disposal. So last year we worked with the native village of Port Hayden, which is located there where that blue dot is, to transport 30,000 pounds of garbage to Kodiak, where it will be recycled with Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. And then last week we worked with a commercial fishing group in Cordova, to ship 5,500 pounds of debris to Seattle, where it will be recycled. And we're looking forward to working with the Science Center here in Sitka, and with the Yakutat tribe and the Aleut community of St. Paul Island, as well as many others around the state, to help transport debris that is collected during cleanups out of the community and to one of these recyclers. So circling back to the question, how do you stay hopeful? So the 3 communities that I shared today are just a few among many in Alaska that are doing cleanups. And over the years, millions of pounds of trash have been removed from shorelines in Alaska, which is pretty amazing. The last time that anyone really looked at the whole landscape of cleanups that have happened in Alaska was in 2014. And in that report from 2006 to 2014, over 3 million pounds of garbage had been removed. And so there are so many more groups doing cleanups now than there were then. And so I know that number is so much higher. And one of the things we're working on is trying to capture that and figure out how many cleanups are happening in the state and how much garbage has been removed. And while the main goal of marine debris cleanups is, of course, to clean up, these removal efforts really do so much more. They raise awareness of the issue. They allow us to build knowledge and collect data. They educate people. They inspire stories. But most importantly, they create connections. And to me, that is the most powerful part of marine debris cleanups. They have this way of bringing people together from different generations, different backgrounds, different beliefs, different political affiliations, and they allow us to work together side by side with a shared purpose. And in a time when division feels more visible than ever, the more things that we can find that we connect on, the better. And it's in moments like these, connections like these, and getting to work together with people that I find hope. So I guess I could have just told you the word connection as the answer, but instead I told you that very long story. So to wrap things up and to spell things out very clearly and to make sure I included at least one graph in my presentation, the more cleanups you participate in, the more connected that you will feel. And the more connected that you feel, the more hopeful you will be. So cleanups equals connection equals hope. It's not done yet. So now that you feel hopeful, what can you do? So you could join a cleanup in your area, find a local group that puts on cleanups and see how you can get involved. But if there's not a group, that shouldn't stop you. You can download the CleanSwell app, which Ocean Conservancy manages, and it's a way to get out and record your observations and send that data to our global database so your cleanup can be reflected in that. You can educate and advocate, share what you now know about marine debris with your friends and family. You can visit the Ocean Conservancy Action Center on our website that will send automated emails to policymakers. You can, of course, say no to plastic whenever possible. I know it can be hard living in remote communities. Sometimes we don't have other options, but I really do believe that individual actions can make a difference. Yes, I see people with their reusable water bottles. Things like that are awesome. And not to sound like a broken record, but you can connect. And I'm sure you all are familiar with the Maya Angelou quote that at the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And so I'm well aware that by tomorrow, you might only remember 3 things that I said. And by next week, it might be 1. And by next year, it might be none. And that's okay. But what I guarantee you will remember about being here at Sitka WhaleFest are the people and the way that you felt while you were here and the connections that you made while you were here. Because that is what has stuck with me over the last 10 years since my very first WhaleFest. And it is because of all the people like you and the connections that I have made while I have been here that I am able to continue to stay hopeful. And it's what inspires me to take action and stay engaged. And so I hope that all of you feel the same. And finally, marine debris is a team sport, and this wouldn't be possible without all the people involved. Having great photographers and videographers on our cleanups allows us to take the cleanup beyond the beach and share a story in a meaningful way with all of you. And then I want to give a big shout out to our partners, the Yakutat Tlingit Tribe, Sitka Sound Science Center, and Aleut Community of St. Paul Island, who are on the ground doing the amazing work and who allowed me to share their stories with you. Like I mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has funded our backhaul program, getting debris out of communities. And then NOAA is a big funder of marine debris and funded the Yakutat cleanup project that I shared. And then on a personal note, I have to thank and give a shout out to all of my mentors and the people in my life that have supported me and inspired me to continue to do this work. And I want to give a special shout out to Lisa Bush, who helped me practice in front of her, and I'm going to call her my editor for my presentation. So big thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there's time. I also would love to hear from all of you what gives you hope. So if you want to share now or find me later, I would love to chat. So thank you so much.